Okay, it took a really long time for us to do our homework on theme, and so I'll post that as a separate video. That way, if people don't want to see extra discussion on theme, they can skip that. But today we're going to be talking about hooks. So when I say every book, every movie, every short story needs a narrative hook, do you guys know what I'm talking about? What's a narrative hook?
A hook?
The intro.
It's like you read the back of a book. Today was great until it wasn't. It's interesting.
Okay, it's something interesting. Eli, you had a really good answer. What was your answer?
It's just something to lure the reader in to actually read your book instead of skipping over it like they would.
That's right. So it's something to hook them into reading, okay? And it can be, ideally, it'd be awesome if it was one sentence. And so we'll talk about opening lines. Okay. What are you doing? We'll talk about opening lines in another discussion because that's a whole beast, and probably I spend as much time on my opening line as my first couple of chapters, and I change them around usually a million times. But a hook, a really, really good hook. Actually, I should have looked up what it was. One of the best hooks of all time, I think, is in the book called The Glass Castle. And it has an amazing hook, and it's something like, I was driving down the road in a taxi cab, and I looked to my right and saw, on the way to a gala or something, and I looked to my right and saw my mom rummaging around in a trash dumpster. And you're like, what? So hooks can take a bunch of forms. Sometimes they are, I need more information. So it gives you something that you're like, what? So I'm going to call that the intrigue hook. So you guys this is where you write that down.
Oh, okay.
So write down like the forms of hooks that you can find. Okay. So there's going to be like an intrigue hook, like, ooh, I need more information. There could be a humorous hook, like it says something that's funny. Also, this would fall under the intrigue hook, but something that makes you say, what? Like something confusing. So what does juxtaposition mean? Does anyone know? If I say, well, that sentence has a juxtaposition, or those two things are juxtaposed, what am I talking about? So I gave you guys a hook a while back, and it said, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, right? So that's a juxtaposition. It was good, it was bad. It was hot, it was cold. It was funny, it was boring, right? So you're taking things that don't fit together, and you're jamming them in together. And that hook that I gave you from The Glass Castle, that one was a juxtaposition as well, right? She's talking about, she's on her way to a gala in Manhattan, and she's fancy and wonderful, and she looks over, and what does she see? Her mother is rummaging around in a dumpster, right? Her mom's trash diving, okay? So that's a juxtaposition. You're like, why is she fancy and her mom is homeless dumpster diving, right? So what happened here? So that's also an intrigue hook, right? There are humor hooks, and I don't know this for sure, but if I had to guess, I grabbed a couple of our summer reading books. So we've got Grump, Diary of a Wimpy Kid, Where the Watermelons Grow, Howl's Moving Castle, and Ghost. I am guessing that the hook at the beginning of Diary of a Wimpy Kid would be what kind?
Humorous.
A humorous hook. Okay. There are going to be some that are going to be concerning, or a worrisome hook, like something that we call it a suspense hook. Something that you're scared by, or something that you're worried about. You know, maybe those are like mysteries and thrillers are going to begin with, it was cold the day that Dan Martin died, or it started raining the moment I murdered Ann Bishop, and it didn't stop for weeks or something. I don't know. They start with something like that. And you could also, people might call that, instead of suspense, they might also call it a shock. Okay.
Because he killed someone and then it flooded.
But let's look at this. I bet this is an example of a humorous hook. So Diary of a Wimpy Kid, if you don't know, is kind of like a comic book sort of in book form. And so it's like looks handwritten. And so it says, September, Tuesday. First of all, let me get something straight. This is a journal in all caps, not a diary. Okay, so that's the first sentence. And that kind of gives you voice, which we'll talk about in another lesson. But that gives you this kid's voice right off. This is not a diary. This is a journal, right? A journal is fine. A boy can keep a journal, but a diary is for what?
Girls.
Is for girls. So it's telling you right off the bat with that one sentence, even if you hadn't seen the cover or read anything else, when you read Tuesday with a line under it, first of all, let me get something straight, this is a journal, not a diary. You know right off the bat, it's a kid, because it's little kid handwriting. You know it's a boy, because he's worried about it being a journal, not a diary, right? And you know that this is all going to be first person present, and it's narrated by this kid,
Wow,
right?
that's like the detective of the writing world. It's like, this is all
What does
the
this
clues.
mean? But you processed all of that information when I read that. I promise you, all of you could have answered those questions. If I said, is it first person? Is it third person? You would have said, well, it's first person. He says, let me get something straight, right? Is it a boy or a girl? Well, I bet it's a boy because he says he doesn't want it to be a diary, right? So it doesn't say that he's a boy. It doesn't tell us that anywhere. It doesn't say he's not a girl, but we could all assume that because of what he put in there. And it's a humor hook, right? So you read that and you're like, dude, this book's going to be really funny, because even the first sentence was funny. The kid's worried about someone thinking that he's writing a diary, right? So let's talk about the hook on Ghost. So now, a lot of times, even in good books, the hook takes time. Does anyone, I know Eli and Dora have read it. Do you guys remember my book, Displaced? Do you remember the very first line? Eli, what's the first line? Do you remember it?
My mom should have killed me the day I was.
That's right, Dora. That's what it is. So the first line is, my mother should have killed me the day I was born. And then it goes on to say, like, in her 900-year rule, saving my life was her only single act of mercy. Okay, and so you read that and you're like, what kind of person's mom should have killed them the day they were born? So that's what kind of hook? Suspense and intrigue combined, okay? Because you know she should have died, so that makes it more of a suspense or like thriller kind of thing. And then also intrigue, because why should her mom have killed her, right? You want to know the answer to that question. And so let's look at Howl's Moving Castle, okay? Howl's Moving Castles. Oh, I was going to read Ghost. Sorry, I forgot. We'll look at Ghost. I forgot I didn't read that one. I got distracted. Okay, so Ghost starts, but what I meant to say was sometimes it's one line. Sometimes the hook spans like a scene or several pages, okay, especially in a book. So I don't know, but we'll see. The very first line of this is only 3 words. Check this out. Okay, what does that tell you about this book? Check this out. That's a weird way to start, right? It's very kind of conversational. So if you keep going and you read the next line, it says, this dude named Andrew Dahl holds the world record for blowing up the most balloons, ... with his nose. Yeah, period. That's true, period. Not sure how he found out that was some kind of special talent, and I can't even imagine how much snot be in those balloons, but hey, it's a thing, and Andrew's the best at it. So it's a kid, right? Who's writing? Does that sound like a kid? Mm-hmm. Does it sound like someone who is interested in records?
Yeah.
Yeah, but doesn't that seem, to me, now you guys are kids, but to me, I can immediately tell this is someone who's young, because an adult wouldn't be like, dude, check this out. This guy holds these records. An adult would be like, who cares? You know, but this is something he cares about. So you already know world records matter to him. Have we been recording all this? What are you doing to it?
Nothing.
Oh, okay. So that's so what kind of hook would you say Ghost is?
I think intrigue.
It could be intrigue. I would class this as...
I think it's humor.
Yeah, I would class it as humor because he's saying this guy blew balloons with his nose, which is a super weird thing. And he's like, how did he figure out that was a world record holding thing? At what point are you like, I wonder if I could blow this thing up with my nose, right? That's weird. So let's look at Howl's Moving Castle, okay? Howl's Moving Castle is a book. Has anyone read it yet?
I know.
Okay. Howl's Moving Castle is about a fairy tale land, right? So, but we don't know that. Let's just read the first, and it says, Chapter 1, and Chapter 1 has a title, In Which Sophie Talks to Hats. And it starts with, in the land of Ingery, where such things as 7-league boots and cloaks of invisibility really exist. So they're telling you immediately. We're in that opening clause, and you already know the place is called Ingery, which I've never heard of, so maybe fake, where such things as 7-league boots and cloaks of invisibility really exist. So now we know we're squarely in what kind of world?
Fiction.
Fantasy world, a fiction world, okay? It is quite a misfortune to be born the eldest of 3. So here in America, we regularly think it's great to be the oldest because, Eli, you get to do all the dishes, right? And you get to take care of your younger siblings. So, you get to be the oldest, so you're the one who gets to stay up later. You're the one who gets to spend more one-on-one time with mom and dad. There's some great things about being oldest. You don't usually think, I'm the oldest. Oh, my life is horrible. But here we're saying it's quite a misfortune to be born the eldest of 3. And then it says, everyone knows you are the one who will fail first. And worst, if the 3 of you are set out to seek your fortunes. So you're going to fail the first, and you're going to fail the worst. So if you're paying attention, this is giving you some clues that we're in fairy tale land. Not just fantasy, but fairy tale fantasy, because in fairy tale fantasy, it's the youngest daughter who always has the adventures. It's the youngest daughter who ends up with the prince. It's the youngest daughter who gets everything good to happen to them. The older stepsisters, they always do poorly. There's always some kind of problem, right? So what kind of hook is this?
Yeah, me.
Of course, the best hooks combine a bunch. I would say probably intrigue, because you're like, what kind of world is this? Also, what did you say?
What?
Yeah, probably intrigue, because you're thinking, what is going on? Also, probably a little bit of humor, because we think it's strange, right? You guys laughed when I said, because the oldest person has it worst, right? But we actually think, in many ways, the oldest person has it best, right? The oldest kid. Okay, let's do Where the Watermelons Grow, okay? So Where the Watermelons Grow starts with, on summer nights, the moon reaches right in through my window and paints itself across the ceiling in swirls and gleams of silver. So is this book something that's cram-packed with action? Probably not, because the opening line is description, right? Now, is it cool description? Yes. Does it say, on summer nights it's hot and sweaty?
No.
Does it say, on summer nights the light stays out longer?
No.
No, it's not just facts, okay? It says, on summer nights, the moon reaches right in through my window and paints itself across the ceiling in swirls and gleams of silver. So what kind of hook do you think this is? I'd call this an intrigue hook, okay? And with that kind of, please don't. It's really distracting, okay? And then the next book we're going to do is called Grump. Okay, Grump starts with, actually, I think the dedication is really funny, but we'll skip that part. All right, chapter 1, it says, Odd Little Dwarfling. And the beginning of the book says, I was born just feet from the surface of the earth, completely unheard of for a dwarf, but it couldn't be helped. Most dwarves, so I could stop at that sentence and say, just feet from the surface of the earth. So he was born below the earth, but too close for comfort, apparently. Completely unheard of for a dwarf, but it couldn't be helped. So what do we already know? The main character is what?
A dwarf.
A dwarf. The main character was born in normal circumstances or strange ones?
Strange.
Strange ones. And we already know that the name of this is Grump and it has a dwarf on the front. So we're thinking maybe that's part of the reason that he's grumpy. Maybe he was broken by being born too close to the surface, right? And so I think there's both intrigue and humor in this, right? You're going to see that a lot of these hooks that work, they combine multiple elements, okay?
Yeah, like intrigue and humor usually.
Intrigue and humor are in a bunch of them, right? Most hooks are going to...
Or suspense.
Because what's the job of a
It would be
hook?
the best if you smash them all
If a
together.
hook does a good job, what does it do?
It makes you read the rest
It compels you to keep reading. The whole point of a hook is, ooh, that's interesting. Now I want to know what more.
And
Yes.
then you have to keep them hooked.
Like in the graphic novel, when I was reading Wings of Fire, it's like, I don't want to stop reading.
You had to keep reading. We're going to talk a lot in the next few weeks over what keeps people reading.
I don't
okay?
really like good hooks because then I have to stay up all night.
Well, the hook itself will not be enough to keep you up all night. That's enough to pick up the book.
But like
Then we're
good
going to talk about
books.
well-written books, yes, should compel you to turn pages, and we'll talk about how we get them to do that, okay? But then if you keep reading, the second sentence says, most dwarves are born deep underground, at least a mile below the surface, and the surface is capitalized, preferably in a cavern filled with crystals and gems. Diamonds for strength, emeralds for wisdom, and sapphires for truth. So we're already setting up that this is what kind of world?
Atlantis.
A fantasy world, right? Okay, and not everything is normal for this, so that makes it interesting, okay? All right, so now we're going to talk about our homework for the hook, okay? So for our hooks this week, I saw it. For our hooks this week, I need us to do the following. Okay, we have a 2-part homework assignment. Part number 1, I want you guys to pick 10 books. I want you to write down the opening line. And it can't be these 5. It has to be something other than these 5. I want you to write down the opening line, and I want you to tell me why that hook keeps you reading. Or if it failed. There are certainly books out there where you pick it up and the opening line
Magic
is
Tree
kind of
House.
lame, okay? So if you get an opening line and you think this does not compel me to read further, go ahead and give it a paragraph. And if it doesn't nail you with something awesome at the end of that paragraph, well, then maybe. But I like to give books at least a paragraph to do something interesting. And then I want you to tell me what kind of hook it is. Okay? intrigue, humor. You could say, what I should do is look up, I'm sure there's someone who's identified all the different types of hooks. Suspense. Okay. All right. So the second part of your homework is I would like you, and you can use the topics that you picked up when we studied conflict if you want. I want you to write down 5 opening lines. They may not be amazing. I just want you to practice. I want you to kind of see how hard it is. It's awfully hard to come up with something that has to do with that conflict or has to do with your world that entices people to keep reading. And when we do those, we're going to be very kind to one another, because writing a hook is one of the hardest things that we'll do. Because in order to have a good hook, you have to have something intriguing about your story. So these can be some of the ones that we've had prompts for, or they can be something completely different, a story that you may want to write or an idea that you may have had, but it can't be copied. You can't pick your 5 from some other book. Okay, so we're going to write down 10 books, write down their hook, and identify what it is that's compelling. And if you can, give it a label, say what kind of hook it is. And then I want you to come up with 5 of your own hooks, okay? And then listen, there's one more subcomponent, because remember, every single week we do a book report on a book. The book reports are supposed to say a sentence or 2 about the name and title of the book and what it's about, kind of like I summarized the books when we were doing theme on the last one. And then it's also supposed to say, number 2, and that's the assignment for this week, tell me about the hook of the book and whether it was just a line or whether it went on and on. A good book is probably going to have a hook that lasts several pages. So they'll have an opening line that's good, but then they should have a hook that's happening. So we've only really talked about opening line hooks. Later this week, while we're in Galveston, we're going to the beach, I'm going to try and do another one that talks about a hook that lasts a couple of pages. And we'll probably pick 1 or 2 and just go over those, okay? And then I want you to go ahead, like always, and tell me what your thoughts are on the book, okay? All right, that's hooks, part 1.